Let's talk about the 4 basic ways that you can immigrate to the United States. All right, the first one is family-based. This is like, Maria's example or Miguel's example. He just wasn't successful. But basically, you're sponsored by a close family member who is already a citizen or a permanent resident and who can prove that that person or someone else who will sign a paper has the financial ability to support you. That's family-based. Then there's asylum or refugees. These are people who cannot return to their home country for fear of persecution based on either their national origin, ethnicity, political opinion, membership in a particular social group, or their religion. They can't go home. Then there's the diversity lottery. We do, in fact, have a federal lottery that gives out green cards. Gives out about 50,000 a year, about the same number as asylum. We take about 50,000 refugees a year usually. The president can set that number, but usually about 50,000. Same number, diversity lottery. The diversity lottery is to maintain diversity in our immigrant pool. So the only people eligible for the diversity lottery are from countries where there's not a lot of immigration now. And the government sets those up. There's an application process. You have to prove you have at least 2 years work experience or higher education, beyond secondary school. And if you're chosen, you can immigrate. And then we have the employment-based system, which is you're sponsored by an employer who can prove to the Department of Labor that there's not a U.S. citizen or permanent resident who can already do the job here, and that you're qualified to do the job, and that they're paying a reasonable wage, the prevailing wage. They're not undercutting the U.S. job market. Okay, I'm going to go into the family-based system in more depth because this is the primary system of immigration in the United States. We have almost 500,000 people who can immigrate under the family-based quotas every year. And that may sound like a really high number, but when I did the math, does anybody know how many people we have in the U.S. right now? About 300 million. Okay, so when you do the math, it comes out to 0.15%. In other words, 0.1.5% of the population, U.S. population every year. Okay, but this is family-based immigration. So, for family-based immigration, there's an unlimited number of spouses, minor children, and minor children of U.S. citizens, and parents of U.S. citizens if the U.S. citizen is over 21. So babies cannot sponsor their parents. Okay, but once the baby is 21, the baby could sponsor the parents. So that's an unlimited number. And the way they manage that is if it goes over a certain amount, those numbers start to come out of the other groups of family-based applicants who can apply. So there's quotas for all the other categories. The first one is unmarried sons and daughters of U.S. citizens. Then there's spouses and unmarried sons and daughters of permanent residents, married sons and daughters of U.S. citizens, and brothers and sisters of U.S. citizens. That's it, okay? Grandma cannot come, Aunt May can't come, Cousin Joe cannot come, all right? It's only those family relationships. That's it. So, now, to talk a little bit more about what they call the immediate relative category. That's the spouses, minor children, and parents of adult children. There's some very important safeguards or, benefits of being an immediate relative. One is that unauthorized employment and unlawful presence, in other words, being out of status, so to speak, and all that is waived if the person originally entered the U.S. with inspection, meaning legally. All right, if the person initially entered legally, the fact that that person became out of status or had unlawful presence or worked unauthorized, all that is waived if they apply for immigration based on that sponsorship of their U.S. citizen relative. For marriages, you have to prove that it's a valid marriage, not just for immigration purposes. They give you a 2-year conditional period if you haven't already been married 2 years. They give you a 2-year conditional period to be married, be a permanent resident, but if at the end of the 2 years you can't prove that was a valid marriage, then you're out. Okay? And you can immigrate in this category even if you already are in removal or deportation proceedings. Removal is just another word for deportation. Before you get married, but you have a much higher standard of showing that it's really a valid marriage, that you didn't just get married to get out of deportation. But you can do that. Unlawful presence is a really bad thing. You do not want to have unlawful presence, okay? It means that not only are you not in a valid status, but other really bad things will happen to you if you have too much unlawful presence. So, which I'll explain, but first, unlawful presence starts in particular situations. It starts on the first day that a person enters without authorization. So if someone just comes over the border, they hire a coyote and bring them over the border. The first day they enter, they're in unlawful presence. It also can start on the first day a particular status expires. So our friend who came in as the L1 till April 23rd, if that person was still here and hadn't done anything to change or extend the status, that person would be not only out of status, but would be unlawfully present, okay, because there was an end date on that I-94 and that person stayed too long. Also, it starts if a judge or someone from the Immigration Service tells you that you're no longer in a valid status, then you're unlawfully present from the day you get that notice. And the other thing about unlawful presence is, although children are unlawfully present, until you're 18, it doesn't really count against you. There's no